Welcome to Just One More Watch. This year, 2021, I am more determined than ever to bring you the best. The best big brand watches, the best AliExpress watches, and the best new micro brand watches as and when they're released to market. And there have been some fantastic micros released already this year, and we're only in mid-March. But what the best actually means for me this year anyway, I can tell is different. I look into my top watch box and it looks quite different than it did 12 months ago. I've talked about this before. New brands coming onto market, if they want to sell us just one more watch, they're going to have to sell us something different, something we don't already have 2 or 3 very similar pieces of. Now, I'm guessing, I'm going to take a stab in the dark, go out on a limb here. I'm guessing you don't already have a watermelon coloured column wheel chronograph lurking in your collection. I know I certainly don't. Enter Studio Underdog. Now, you saw the pop-up, I'm sure. This video is sponsored by Studio Underdog. They're launching this watch on Kickstarter today, the 10th of March, and if the campaign is successful, they'll be sending me one in the colorway of my choosing. And I may well choose the watermelon color. Perhaps you spotted this one on Instagram. I specifically went into the fruit and veg section of my local supermarket just to get this shot. The woman behind the counter thought I was bonkers. It should be noted though that you don't have to go for watermelon. There are a couple of slightly more sensible colors available, including a quirky looking panda, though I suspect that the brand would rather be associated with the word quirky than the word sensible. Let's flip the camera and have a look at it. So a pair of colourful column wheel chronographs to show you today. They sent me 2 out of the 3 different colourways. I have the Desert Sky and the Watermelon. I am not going to insult your intelligence by telling you which one is which. I'm sure you can work that out for yourself. Now the Watermelon may be the poster boy today, but I'm going to give both of these dials equal time. I'm going to go back and forth between the two. And like I said, there is a Panda, which is slightly more conservative. This is certainly a watch that has its tongue firmly in its cheek and its quirk on its sleeve, so don't expect something ordinary, but it's not quite as out there as these two. The price on these, 295 Great British pounds for the early bird specials, or the equivalent in your local currency. I'll leave a link either to their website or to the Kickstarter campaign depending on what time that launches in the description of the video. So props to Richard at Studio Underdog for launching his brand with a green and pink chronograph. You need to have a good sense of humour and a big set of cojones, I would imagine, to do that. I guess you need to have a good sense of humour, I'm not sure about the cojones, to wear this one. I took this away with me for the weekend and I got lots of comments, I have to say, most of them positive from friends. I think they appreciated seeing something a bit quirky, a bit different and a bit colourful on my wrist as well. So, the looks may be modern and the colour scheme decidedly so, but it does have a kind of classic mid-century silhouette and a classic set of dimensions for this style of watch as a consequence, those being 38.5mm in diameter, 14mm thick, though 2mm of that is from a lovely piece of double dome sapphire crystal, really compact 44 lug to lug, 20mm lug width, and on the supplied Italian leather strap, this one weighs in at bang on 70 grams. 3-piece stainless steel case, so we have a fixed stainless steel bezel, stainless steel case, and a screw-on stainless steel case back. Again with sapphire, so it's a sapphire sandwich today. I even think that there's a bit of anti-reflective undercoating on that. I mentioned column wheel chronograph. If you are familiar with this end of the market, you already know what that is. It is, of course, a Seagull ST1901, but more on that later. Screw-down case back, 50 meters of water resistance, but it is not a screw-down crown. It is a manual wind watch. That isn't to say you can't have a screw-down crown with a manual wind watch, but it would be a little bit inconvenient. This one, far from a dive watch anyway. It doesn't really need a screw-down crown. Case finish is neat and tidy. The stepped fixed bezel is all high polished. The mid case has a fine horizontal brush running the length of the case. Brush lugs, there is just a little bit of high polish transitioning between those two surfaces, and high polish pushers. Now the crown. Obviously an important facet of this watch because it is a manual winder, it is nice and grippy and it is a good size. Perhaps you noticed on the thumbnail and various other bits of Studio Underdog merch that is not a O, it's a 0. More on that later. The strap is Italian leather as noted, kind of sand colour on this Desert Sky version, black on the other two. Enough holes here to go down to a 6.5-inch wrist and back up to an 8.5-inch wrist, I reckon, and it is really comfortable. It's got a super soft kind of suede backing here. Quick release spring bars, 2 retainers and a very nice Studio Underdog branded buckle and tang. I'll throw in a bit of macro here. I think that's probably the most printing I've seen on a buckle, but they get away with it. It's really neat and tidy again, much like the case finishing. So let's turn our attention briefly to the aforementioned Seagull ST1901. This thing is a bit of a legend, based on the Venus 175 Swiss chronograph movement that powered so many Swiss chronographs in the 1940s. This thing is ancient. It's a little piece of horological history on your wrist to boot. The story is that the Swiss sold what was an already out-of-date movement to the Chinese in the 1960s. They sold them all the tooling and the equipment. The Chinese refined it a couple of times and they have been knocking them out by the hundreds of thousands ever since then. There is a rumour that they're still using the original Swiss tools, but I'd imagine that that is a falsity. I'd imagine they've updated it since then. They have put a little bit of decoration here and there, plenty of blue screws. Now I say blue rather than blued. I'd imagine they're painted rather than thermally blued. There's some striping. You can see plenty of rubies. It's a very attractive movement to look at. Perhaps not quite as attractive as you see in the press shots. The press shots always make the ST1901 look sensational. The reality is a little bit rougher than that. It always is, and there's always a bit of variation between individual movements as well. It's a cheap column wheel chronograph. The fact that you're getting one on your wrist at all for less than £300 is a bit of a marvel. We shouldn't expect too much when it comes to finishing. So don't expect incredible levels of finishing with these movements, and don't expect incredible levels of accuracy either. Plus 24, plus 25 seconds per day. I think the stated tolerances of these are minus 15 to plus 40, so it's still well within its permitted range. They are relatively easy to adjust though. Take the case back off, there's a little lever. If you have a time grapher, it's a 5-minute job. If you don't have a time grapher, it'll probably take you a couple of days, but you should be able to narrow that down to within plus or minus 10 seconds per day. But let's have a look at the operation. Let's have a look at the operation from the back for a start. One push of the top pusher to start the movement, one push to stop it, one push to reset it. Let's see how that looks from the front. And that is how it looks from the front. 21 jewel, non-hacking but obviously hand winding. It is not auto. They do an auto of this. I've only reviewed one. It was prohibitively thick. Now they quote a 50-hour power reserve with the chrono stopped, a 45-hour power reserve if you want that extra dynamism, if you just like something else going on in the dial, or if you are insisting on using the chronograph on a continuous basis. 30-minute chrono. So the larger of the dials at the 3 o'clock there is the chrono, the smaller of the dial is a continuously ticking small second at the 9. Bicompax, that's a fabulous word meaning 2 registers. It's like the Italians when they call the Maserati the quattro porte, meaning 4 doors. The reality is less glamorous than you think. So let's get the macro lens out and have a look at these 2 different colours under macro. I've already explained how the chronograph works. I'll put in some time lapse here. You can see what the dial looks like with the chrono in operation over the course of 10 minutes or so. Now the dials on these are 2 layered dials, so 2 layers, 1 colour in each. The outer layer has a sandblasted finish, like a satin sandblast. The inner layer has a coarse degradé, a kind of rough finish. You can see quite clearly the texture on both of these there. So the Desert Sky colour, the outer edges are kind of yellowy sandy colour, the inner dial is blue. On the watermelon, the outer is green obviously, and the inner is pink. There's an additional texture, there's some nice concentric circles on the second hand as well. Also note the extra colours on both. The chrono timer split 3 different shades of green and 3 different shades of kind of sandy beige on the Desert Sky model. Plus there's another little ring of the darkest of these 3 as the dial transitions between that inner layer and the outer layer. Studio Underdog Biocompacts, the ST1901, form part of that inner dial surface, as do the words mechanical and hand winding printed above the index at 6. Hour markers also on that inner dial, also slightly raised from that inner dial, adding an extra bit of depth. You get a tachymeter scale printed around the outer edge, and in that coloured ring, the transitional coloured ring, there are minute markers. Now they're not the most obvious in the first place, and also you're not actually looking at the markers to get the minutes, you're looking at the gaps between the markers to get the minutes. So you know, it's not the easiest watch in the world to set, or at least not to set accurately anyway. Hands on all models are the same, very simple black satin finished pencil hands, nicely in proportion to the watch. But there is one final extra bit of colour. The two tips of the two Chrono hands are colour matched. So they're white on the watermelon, but they are a little bit of kind of orangey brown colour on the Desert Sky model. Perhaps you also noticed a slight difference between the hour markers on each of these two watches. The watermelon ones shaped like watermelon pips. Like I said, this watch has its tongue firmly in its cheek. So how does it wear then? Well, like I said, I took this one away for the weekend and I enjoyed wearing it. I do like this slightly smaller Chrono. Like I said, the kind of mid-century profile, the mid-century silhouette, but with decidedly modern, updated styling. 45 lug to lug. The strap goes down to about 6.5 inches, I reckon. You can swap that out if you have a slightly smaller wrist for a strap of your own, and you'd have no problems with this one at all, thanks to that really short lug to lug length. Same for the Desert Sky model, and I think that the strap choice there really complements the dial colour tones. Legibility, well, not really a massive concern with this one, I don't think. You're too busy laughing at yourself for having the audacity to wear a pink and green watch. Outside, it is a lovely piece of double-domed sapphire crystal covering the dial. You get a nice bit of flecto from that. I'll show you the pocket shots in just a minute or two. As I said, on wrist, super compact lug to lug. It wears very well. 14mm thick, but it doesn't feel that way. And the whole case is nicely domed in profile to match the sapphire crystal. You'll have no problems if you are going to be slipping this one under a cuff, as they say, if you're wearing it as a work watch, if you dare to wear it as a work watch. And that's the pocket shot. I'll give you brief pocket shots with both of the colourways. I think it's an attractive looking little watch, and I think the dial is very nicely done, and there's that bit of flecto you get from the sapphire as well. But what am I going to complain about today? What are my moans and niggles with this little quirky Studio Underdog Chrono? Well, I don't have much materially to complain about. I think they've done a good job. It's a fairly simple watch, and they have achieved their aim of making a quirky, attractive, colourful little watch that definitely comes from the left of field. The loom, I haven't shown you the loom yet. There is a slender sliver of C3 running the length of the hour and the minute hand. Really, that's the kind of minimal loom when you just have those two main hands loomed. I bet here or there on the dial would not have gone amiss, but I understand why they did it. The loom is okay, but nothing to write home about. The price, £295 is the early bird, the super early bird. Early bird's at £325. Regular price of these is going to be £370. Now that is roughly $500 US. It looks more attractive on the super early bird than it does at the regular price, that's for sure. There is, of course, a much cheaper way into an ST1901 powered watch, that being the Seagull 1963. But this one, I guess, sits in the middle of the range. You can also spend a lot more. The Baltics Bio Compacts, for example, coming in at about 650 USD. So it's not the cheapest, but it's not the most expensive either. I wonder if they would have sold more though if they got the price closer to 250 rather than to 300. And you are going to have to be okay with a fair degree of quirkiness if you are going to get on board this particular bus. Studio Underd0g, I mentioned that earlier on, the 0 rather than the O. Apparently Richard, the owner, who seems like a bit of a quirky gentleman himself, said that apparently the world's most popular password is password with a 0 rather than O for the last O, so that's kind of where that comes into. Again, it's a little bit out there, a little bit left field, but then that's all part of this brand shtick, isn't it? Why so serious? It certainly doesn't take itself seriously, and for that they should be applauded. I'll be really interested to watch this campaign. I'll be really interested to see how many people actually get this watch and sign up for one of these. I get it, I like it. I think if there is a space in your collection for something quirky, something interesting, a colourful little chronograph, and you're okay with £300, then this is a very nicely done little watch. So there you have it. If you've been looking for a chronograph that redefines the word different, I think you might have just found one, or I think you might have just found 3 of them to be precise. All the best to Studio Underdog. I wish them well. Clearly they're not playing it safe going for a chrono in the first place and with such a degree of quirk to it, but I think they'll find their niche in the market, no problems at all. Thanks for watching. I will see you in a future video.